Welcome back to our chronological Bible study. This is week 19 of our study, video 18, day 119 to day 125, or April 29th to May 5th. We are deep into the kingdom era right now. We've already been through the kingdom of Saul. Now we're in the kingdom of David. We're going to be nearing, this week we neared the end of David's reign, and we're moving over into the kingdom of Solomon. Rewind back to where we were last week. David's son Absalom has risen up against him. To prevent civil war, slaughter of his people, David very wisely departed quietly while he sends certain loyal supporters back to Jerusalem so they can both inform him and counter any advice given to Absalom that might be advantageous. The informers, who were the sons of the two main priests of the time, Zadok and Abiathar, they informed David to go ahead and advance across the Jordan River because they will soon be pursuing him. Absalom and the army will soon be pursuing him. The advisor that's loyal to David that stayed behind, Hushai the Archite, convinces Absalom to mobilize the entire army of Israel, which takes several days to do, in order to give David more time to posture for the battle that's going to come. This will happen away from the city of David. Ahithophel, David's former advisor that became a traitor and then sided with Absalom, has now committed suicide and he's out of the picture. But it says, starting in 2 Samuel chapter 17 verse 24, it says, David soon arrived at Mahanaim, now across the river. By now Absalom had mobilized the entire army of Israel and was leading his troops across the Jordan River. Absalom had appointed Amasa as commander of his army. So this is Joab's cousin. So Joab is the general of David's armies. The cousin of Joab, Absalom, has appointed as his general. His name is Amasa. He had been commander under David. So later on, Joab will actually assassinate his cousin, and we're learning We're learning the character of Joab, and we'll see that very soon. And he's a very brutal but loyal servant of David. Sometimes he takes things into his own hands, and we know from our prior studies that's not always good. 2 Samuel chapter 18. So now David mustered the men who were with him and appointed generals and captains to lead them. He sent the troops out in 3 groups, placing one group under Joab, and one under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and one under Ittai, the man from Gath. The king told his troops, I am going out with you. But his men objected strongly. You must not go, they urged. If we have to turn and run, and even if half of us die, it will make no difference to Absalom's troops. They will be looking only for you. You are worth 10,000 of us. It is better that you stay here in the town and send help if we need it. If you think that's the best plan, I'll do it, David says. So he stood alongside the gate of the town, and all the troops marched out in groups of hundreds and thousands. And the king gave this command to Joab. So he's given it to his three generals. He's divided them up into 3 different units with 3 different generals. And he tells them, he says, for my sake, deal gently with young Absalom. So you might ask yourself, why this Absalom has now betrayed him and overthrown him and taken his throne and slept with his wives, and this is a horrible thing that he's done. Because Absalom is David's kid. He's his child, and he loves his children. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And all the troops heard the king give this order to his commanders. So the battle began in the forest of Ephraim. Remember, Ephraim was the land, the tribal land that was just north of Judah. It was separated by the tribal lands of Benjamin and Dan. But Dan was unable to conquer all of their territory, so they moved up north by the Sea of Galilee. So it's basically just the tribe of Benjamin between Judah and Ephraim. So they've quickly moved across there. The Israelite troops were beaten back by David's men. These are battle-hardened guys. These troops are well experienced. The people that David surrounds himself with are all great warriors. So obviously this is why this has happened. There was a great slaughter that day, and 20,000 men laid down their lives. The battle raged all across the countryside, and more men died because of the forest than were killed by the sword. So you could say probably Joab and his contemporaries here are probably using the terrain against the people that they're fighting. And keep in mind, this is a civil war. These are Israelites fighting Israelites right now. During the battle, Absalom happened to come upon some of David's men. He tried to escape on his mule, but as he rode beneath the thick branches of a great tree, his hair got caught in the tree. His mule kept on going and left him dangling in the air. You can imagine Absalom now is dangling off the ground, caught by his head or his hair, and he is really at the mercy of whoever comes upon him. Verse 10, one of David's men saw what had happened and told Joab, I saw Absalom dangling from a great tree. What? Joab demanded. You saw him there and didn't kill him? Verse 12, I would not kill the king's son or even 1,000 pieces of silver. The man replied to Joab, we all heard the king say to you and Abishai and Ittai, for my sake please spare young Absalom. So he heard that. As I said earlier, they all heard him say spare Absalom. And he's like, if I do that, the king's going to kill me. Nah, I ain't doing that. Verse 13, if I had betrayed the king by killing his son, and the king would certainly find out who did it, you yourself would be the first to abandon me. So we learn how other people view Joab as well. Joab is doing everything he can to hold that power as the general, and even if he has to dime out other people or he has to assassinate his own cousin, he'll do whatever he has to do. Verse 14, Joab says, enough of this nonsense. Then he took 3 daggers and plunged them into Absalom's heart as he dangled, still alive in the great tree. 10 of Joab's young armor-bearers then surrounded Absalom and killed him. Then Joab blew the ram's horn, and his men returned from chasing the army of Israel. They threw Absalom's body into a deep pit in the forest and piled a great heap of stones over it, and all Israel fled to their homes. During his lifetime, Absalom had built a monument to himself in the king's valley, for he said, I have no son to carry on my name. He named the monument after himself and is known as Absalom's monument to this day. So when 2 Samuel was written, Absalom's monument was still there. And in verse 19 of 2 Samuel chapter 18, Zadok's son Ahimaaz, remember these are the 2 informants that went back into Jerusalem. Ahimaaz was one of them. He said, let me run to the king with the good news that the Lord has rescued him from his enemies. No, Joab told him, it wouldn't be good news to the king that his son is dead. You can be my messenger another time, but not today. Then Joab said to a man from Ethiopia, go tell the king what you have seen. So the man bowed and ran off. So Joab's like, no, Ahimaaz, that's not a good idea. I'm not going to send you because whoever tells him this news is in danger. I'm going to send this Ethiopian dude instead. And that guy just is obedient and says, oh yeah, no problem. I got it, Joab, no problem. Ran off. But Ahimaaz continued to plead with Joab, whatever happens, please let me go too. Why should you go, my son? Joab replied. There will be no reward for your news. Joab is remembering back to these times when people came and told David that Saul was dead, and then that he didn't do anything to help him. And then David slew the messenger. He killed the messenger. David literally killed the messenger delivering the news. So Joab knows that this is the tendency David has. He's trying to dissuade Ahimaaz from doing this. Verse 23, yes, but let me go anyway, he begged. Joab finally said, all right, go ahead. So Ahimaaz took the less demanding route by way of the plain and ran to Mahanaim ahead of the Ethiopian. While David was sitting, but remember, David's still across the river. He's not in Jerusalem, he's across the river still. While David was sitting between the inner and outer gates of the town, the watchman climbed to the roof of the gateway by the wall, and as he looked, he saw a lone man running toward them. He shouted the news down to David, and the king replied, if he is alone, he has news. So David knows what's up. As the messenger came closer, the watchman saw another man running toward them. He shouted, "Here comes another one." The king replied, "He also will have news." 27. The first man runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, the watchman says. "He is a good man and comes with good news," the king replied. So, what's David going to do? I don't know. Then Ahimaaz cried out to the king, "Everything is all right." He bowed before the king with his face to the ground, probably out of breath. "Praise the Lord your God, who has handed over the rebels, who dare to stand against my lord the king." "What about young Absalom?" David asked. The king demanded, "Is he all right?" Ahimaaz replied, "When Joab told me to come, there was a lot of commotion, but I didn't know what was happening." "Wait here," the king told him. So Ahimaaz stepped aside. So Ahimaaz kind of knows David's tendency too, and he's like stalling basically to see what David's reaction is going to be. But he wanted to be the one to deliver the news to the king. He just didn't want to deliver all the news to the king. Verse 31, Then the man from Ethiopia arrived and said, "I have good news for my lord the king. Today the Lord has rescued you from all those who rebelled against you." Verse 32, "What about young Absalom?" the king demanded. "Is he all right?" And the Ethiopian replied, "May all of your enemies, my lord the king, both now and in the future, share the fate of that young man." The king was overcome with emotion. He went up to the room over the gateway and burst into tears. And as he went, he cried, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. If only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." And you might be asking yourself, okay, this Absalom guy, right? He premeditatedly waited 2 years and deceived the people, undermined his father, the king. He then deceived the people into thinking that he was crowned king, and then attempted to overthrow him, and would have caused, and did cause, a civil war, and would have caused destruction of his city that he's built. Actually would have hurt Israel rather than helped Israel. And it was just in his conquest of power, he slept with his father's concubines in public, in an unholy public display. You might ask yourself, why is David so filled with grief over the death of this rebellious son? Like I said earlier, David loved all of his children. We ask, why did David mourn for Amnon in the first place? His son who raped his sister Tamar, who was David's daughter. Amnon was his son, as was Tamar his daughter. You may have a son or a daughter that's incarcerated, or is maybe living in a way that you don't condone, or maybe you see it as sinful or wrong or immoral. Perhaps you're a parent of a child who is living a life of sin. You never quit loving your children. They may live in a way that makes you embarrassed, disappointed, sorrowful, angry, but you will never stop loving them. And they need to know that. Let them know that. Let them suffer the repercussions of their actions, but never let them doubt your unconditional love for them. It turns out David wept all the more for Absalom than he did for Amnon. David feels this anguish because he knows he's complicit in Absalom's actions. You're asking, like, okay, well David didn't, hold his head underwater and make him agree to do these things. Absalom did these things on his own. And that's absolutely correct. Absalom did do these things on his own. But there was 2 years that went by when Absalom came back. He fled. He killed Amnon, right? Probably thought that he was doing the right thing by doing so. He killed Amnon, fled, was gone for several years, and then finally came back. And when he came back, his father would not see him. He's waited 2 years before his father would even accept him in his presence. During that 2 years, Absalom's heart was hardened. David's inability to get over his own hurt about the murder of Amnon and the rape of his daughter it gave time for Satan to influence Absalom to the point of betrayal and rebellion, and a sickening and sad display of the influence of the deceiver, the influence the deceiver has on us. And it's this resentment towards his father for him not receiving him back, and this whole confusion that really was the seeds of this rebellion that has gone on. And now we see Absalom has gone on to do unspeakable things. And it's David's so beside himself because he blames himself. He sees that he planted the seeds for this to happen. He allowed it by not receiving his son back with loving arms. He put his son in the hands of the devil. And he thought if perhaps Absalom could be captured, he and David could have some kind of resolution. You know, they could have been redeemed for their actions. But Joab, being the man that he is, has slain David's son, and neither of them can make amends now and to say they're sorry. I love you, Dad. I love you, son. None of that can be. So David's hopes for a resolution of this years-long conflict between father and son, and all this resentment and everything that's built up between them, David's hope for a resolve in that is dashed. And David's lost hope as far as this rebuilding or saving his son goes here. And David feels the guilt of what he's done and how he dealt with his son, and then he feels that his hopes that he had for a resolution of this, for this situation to be resolved, is now gone. And this is why he's so filled with grief over somebody that was horrible to him, a son that was horrible to him. Why he's so filled with grief, because he does at the end of it, he loves him. He loves his son. If this message applies to you today, I plead with you to reach out to your children. Let them know you don't approve of what they do. They have to live with the repercussions of their actions. They knew what they should do and what they shouldn't do. They know wrong from right. They have to live with the repercussions of their actions, but you still love them. They need to know that. Because if they don't know that, they have nothing to come back to. There's no base for them to come home to. You have to be the home that your children can come home to. Even if they don't come home physically, they need to have some sense of belonging in their head. And they need to know that unquestionably that you'll always love them. You may not agree with them. You might not be able to coexist. You may not condone their actions. They may be blatantly doing horrible, sinful things, but they need to know as a parent that you love them, and as only a parent can. This world will lead our children astray, but there is one thing the world can't give them that you can, and that's unconditional love. They cannot get unconditional love from a stranger. They can't get unconditional love from the many traps and snares that are laid before us on this planet. And the work of the devil is definitely not going to give them unconditional love. Everything is conditional on this planet. They're definitely not going to get unconditional anything. That's a reflection. The way a parent unconditionally loves their child is a reflection of how the Lord loves us. He sent His only begotten Son to come to earth. He took on flesh so that we could be redeemed. That's how much He loves us. When you're a parent, you start to understand this level of love. And this is the kind of love that David is demonstrating for his children. Even though Absalom was not given a chance to be redeemed, and Amnon was not given a chance to be redeemed, and that's why there's so much grief involved in his losing his children. So David returns to his throne. Time passes, filled with more rebellion, more strife, more death, more giants are slain, and David grows wiser, and under his rule Israel flourishes. And then David takes a census. 2 Samuel chapter 24, anger of the Lord burns against Israel and caused David to harm them by taking a census. While 1 Chronicles says Satan rose up against Israel and caused David to take a census of the people of Israel. And you might ask yourself, well, which is it? Is it Satan doing it, or is the Lord causing it to happen? It's both. Just as we saw with Job before, the Lord allows Satan sometimes to have certain influence to bring about a specific change. And this is exactly what's going on here. The Lord's anger burned against Israel. Therefore, 1 Chronicles, Satan rose up against Israel and caused David to take a census. You may ask yourself, well, what's wrong with taking a census, right? Well, they were given very specific directions in Exodus 30 about how they were supposed to collect a certain amount of money for each person. They were given specific directions of how to do that then. So there was 2 censuses done. If you remember back in Numbers, there was 2 censuses done. There was one done in the first part of Numbers, and there was one done in the last part of Numbers. And that was to get a census for the size of the army. And that's what David is doing. He's getting a size. So 1 Chronicles chapter 21 verse 5, it said, reported the number of people to David. There were 1,100,000 warriors in all Israel who could handle a sword, and 470,000 in Judah. So David is trying to get a count of how many warriors there are there. Instead of relying on the Lord to supply the number of soldiers, we saw that with Gideon. Gideon had a vast army, and then God reduced it down to a small number, and then God fought the battle for them. Likewise, he's about to hand over power to Solomon, his son, and he likely wants to be able to give Solomon a number, an actual number of how many soldiers there are in the kingdom of Israel. And it's about strength here. It's about David's strength. And there may have been, it's really unclear, but there may have been some kind of pride involved in this. So for whatever reason here, David takes a census. The Lord doesn't think it's good, and he sends a plague, as was the punishment for taking a census in Exodus 30, I might add. So 2 Samuel chapter 24 verse 10, he said, but after he had taken the census, David's conscience began to bother him, and he said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly by taking this census. Please forgive my guilt, Lord, for doing this foolish thing. And then Gad, who is David's seer, who is a prophet, came to him, and he says, the Lord's going to give you 3 options. And then David says, I'll just take whatever the Lord's going to dish out. Verse 13, so the Lord sent a plague upon Israel that morning, and it lasted for 3 days. A total of 70,000 people died throughout the nation. But as the angel of the Lord was preparing to destroy Jerusalem, the Lord relented and said to the death angel, stop, that is enough. And at that moment, the angel of the Lord was by the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. We get a different picture in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 16. It says, David looked up and saw the angel of the Lord standing between heaven and earth with his sword drawn, reaching out over Jerusalem. So David and the leaders of Israel put on burlap to show their deep distress, and they fell face down on the ground. They put on burlap to humble themselves, same when they put ashes on their head. David said to God, I am the one who called for the census. I am the one who has sinned and done wrong. But these people are as innocent as sheep. What have they done? O Lord my God, let your anger fall against me and my family, but do not destroy your people. So it stopped there. It says back in 2 Samuel, it stopped. The plague stopped. The angel of the Lord stopped at the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. If you remember back to previous videos, previous weeks of study, the threshing floor was where the wheat or the good grain was separated from the chaff. They would beat the grain stalks. The seeds would come out of those stalks. Later on, this is used as an illustration for the separation of people that belong to the Lord, of sinners, the difference between what happens to sinners and people that belong to the Lord. The wheat being the people that belong to the Lord, the chaff being the sinners who are burned up later on. And then 2 Samuel chapter 24 verse 18, that day Gad came to David, that's the prophet, came to David and said to him, go up and build an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. So David buys the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. We read on in 1 Chronicles chapter 21, verse 27, the Lord spoke to the angel who put the sword back into his sheath. When David saw the Lord had answered his prayer, he offered sacrifices there at Araunah's threshing floor. At that time, the tabernacle of the Lord and the altar of the burnt offering that Moses had made in the wilderness were located at the place of worship in Gibeon. So the tabernacle is still in Gibeon, right? We're in Jerusalem, the threshing floor of Araunah. But David was not able to go there to inquire of God because he was terrified of the drawn sword of the angel of the Lord. He was afraid of the plague. He didn't want to go to Gibeon to make the sacrifice, so he made it there on the threshing floor. Then David said, "This will be the location for the temple of the Lord God and the place of the altar for Israel's burnt offerings." And that, my friends, is where the temple is built later on, which is the same mountain where Abraham came to sacrifice Isaac, Mount Moriah, where the Temple Mount is today, where the temple no longer is, where the Dome of the Rock is now, that the Islamic people built during their occupation of the land. So then David starts gathering the materials to build the temple. And then we read in 1 Chronicles chapter 22 verse 6, it says, David sent for his son Solomon and instructed him to build a temple for the Lord, the God of Israel. He said, "My son, I wanted to build a temple to honor the name of the Lord my God." David told him, "But the Lord said to me, you have killed many men in the battles you have fought, and since you have shed so much blood in my sight, you will not be the one to build a temple to honor my name. But you will have a son who will be a man of peace. I will give him peace with his enemies and all the surrounding lands. His name will be Solomon, and I will give peace and quiet to Israel during his reign. He is the one who will build a temple to honor my name. He will be my son, and I will be his father, and I will secure the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever." David recites that language that was in the Davidic Covenant. That's the last covenant we covered last week. Verse 17, then David ordered all the leaders of Israel to assist Solomon in this project. Verse 19, now seek the Lord your God with all your heart and soul. Build the sanctuary of the Lord God so that you can bring the ark of the Lord's covenant and the holy vessels of God into the temple built to honor the Lord's name. So they have a plan. They're going to build this temple where the threshing floor was, where the plague stopped at, where David saw the angel with the sword drawn standing over the top of Jerusalem. Okay, they're going to build a temple there, and then they're going to take the ark, which is in a little tent that David set up for it, and they're going to put that into the ark. And that temple is going to serve as a permanent tabernacle, a house for the Lord. So David gives all the plans for the temple to Solomon, and he starts collecting all the vast wealth and all the materials that they're going to need to build this temple. Then we're going to fast forward to 1 Chronicles 29, verse 22. They feasted and drank in the Lord's presence with great joy that day. And again they crowned David's son Solomon as their new king. They anointed him before the Lord as their leader, and they anointed Zadok as priest. So now Zadok is given the priesthood, right? Remember we talked about Abiathar. Somehow it got transferred during the judges' era over to the line of Ithamar. And now the priesthood is being transferred back over to the line of Eleazar, whose descendant is Zadok now. And both these priests have been working with David. They've been loyal to David throughout this entire journey, throughout his entire reign. 1 Kings chapter 1. King David was now very old, and no matter how many blankets covered him, he could not keep warm. So he's really old, bedridden half the time. So they searched through the land for a girl to lay with him, and not sleep with him, but just lay next to him and give him body heat, to serve as a heater, a living heater, basically. So they found one. And about that time, David's son Adonijah, this is 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 5, David's son Adonijah, whose mother was Haggith, began boasting, "I will make myself king." So he's from the royal household. He has wealth. He has all the ability to do that. So he recruited some men, and his father King David had never disciplined him at any time, even asking, "Why are you doing that?" Adonijah has been born next after Absalom, and he was very handsome. So there was Absalom, then the next son underneath was Adonijah. So Adonijah has now rose up, and he's trying to take the throne. So Verse 7, Adonijah took Joab, son of Zeruiah, and Abiathar the priest into his confidence, and they agreed to help him become king. But Zadok the priest, Benaiah son of Jehoiada, Nathan the prophet, Shimei, Ray, and David's personal bodyguard refused to support Adonijah. Adonijah went to the stone of Zoeleth near the spring of Enrogel, where he sacrificed sheep, cattle, fattened calves. He invited all his brothers and the other sons of King David and all the royal officials of Judah, but he did not invite Nathan the prophet or Benaiah or the king's bodyguard or his brother Solomon. Obviously, he's not going to invite Solomon because Solomon's actually supposed to be the king, and they all know that. Then Nathan went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and asked her, "Haven't you heard that Haggith's son Adonijah has made himself king?" So then Bathsheba goes and tells David. We go to 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 28. It says, King David responded, "Call Bathsheba." So she came back in. This is after Nathan had been in and talking to him about it. Nathan the prophet. She came back in and stood before the king. And the king repeated his vow, "As surely as the Lord lives, who has rescued me from every danger, your son Solomon will be the next king, and will sit on my throne this very day, just as I vowed to you before the Lord, the God of Israel." Then Bathsheba bowed down with her face to the ground before the king and exclaimed, "May my Lord King David live forever." And this is Bathsheba, Solomon's mother. Bathsheba was the woman that he saw on the rooftop, who David had killed her husband, Uriah the Hittite. So this is that relationship's son, Solomon. Then King David ordered, "Call Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, Benaiah the son of Jehoiada." When they came into the king's presence, the king said to them, "Take Solomon and my officials, go down to the Gihon spring. Solomon is to ride on my own mule. There Zadok the priest and Nathan the prophet are to anoint him king over Israel. Blow the ram's horn and shout, 'Long live King Solomon.' Then escort him back here, and he will sit on my throne. He will succeed me as king, for I have appointed him to be ruler over Israel and Judah." So here David has made Solomon king himself. So there's no doubt, if David passes away, there's going to be no doubt about who's king, because Solomon's already on the throne now. He's already king. So they did all those things that David said. And down in verse 41 it said, Adonijah and his guests heard the celebrating and shouting just as they were finishing their banquet. And when Joab heard the sound of the ram's horn, he asked, "What's going on? Why is the city in such an uproar?" And while he was still speaking, Jonathan, son of Abiathar the priest, arrived. "Come in," Adonijah said to him, "for you are a good man. You must have good news." "Not at all," Jonathan replied. "Our Lord King David has just declared Solomon king." The king sent him down to Gihon spring with Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet, and Benaiah son of Jehoiada, and protected by the king's bodyguard. They had him ride on the king's own mule, and Zadok and Nathan have anointed him at the Gihon's spring as the new king, and they have just returned, and the whole city is celebrating and rejoicing. That's what all the noise is about. What's more, Solomon is now sitting on the royal throne as king. And all the royal officials have gone to King David and congratulated him, saying, "May your God make Solomon's fame even greater than your own, and may Solomon's reign be even greater than yours." Then the king bowed his head in worship as he lay in his bed. And he said, "Praise the Lord, the God of Israel, who today has chosen a successor to sit on my throne while I am still alive to see it." Then all of Adonijah's guests jumped up in panic from the banquet table and quickly scattered. Adonijah was afraid of Solomon, so he rushed to the sacred tent and grabbed onto the horns of the altar. So there's still the tabernacle set up at Gibeon. Adonijah runs to the altar in front of that where they make sacrifices, and he grabs onto the horns. And the horns symbolize power. So he's holding on to the horns, and he's basically saying that no one can touch me. I have the Lord's power right now. You can't slay me. We'll see it a few times where people run, they grab the horns of the altar thinking that they're not going to be slayed. But, let's see here. Word soon reached Solomon that Adonijah had seized the horns of the altar in fear, and that he was pleading, "Let King Solomon swear today he will not kill me." Solomon replied, "If he proves himself to be loyal, not a hair on his head will be touched. But if he makes trouble, he will die." So King Solomon summoned Adonijah, and they brought him down from the altar. He came and bowed respectfully before King Solomon, who dismissed him, saying, "Go on home." So remember the conditions of this promise that Solomon has made to Adonijah. You'll be spared as long as you don't cause any harm. And the reason why this was such a big deal was that everyone already knew that Solomon was going to be the next king. This is just them being power hungry, the other sons being power hungry and trying to grab power here, as was customary and has been throughout all of history, where when one king dies and there's no clear successor, the potential successors then all fight over the throne. Now has kept that from happening by making Solomon king. He handed Solomon the crown, gave him the throne while he was still alive. So there's no doubt in anybody's mind who the king of Israel is, who the next king of Israel is, and that it's Solomon. We'll see this week how Solomon is the wisest king. And out of that wisdom that is given to him by God, he writes 3 vertical books. And we'll go over that in the beginning of next week's video, the 3 vertical books. Remember, David writes some of Psalms, right, because he's a musician, right? And those Psalms reflect how his relationship with God. It gives us some information about how God deals with people and how people can deal with God, right? We get that from Psalms, and that was David. And now we're going to get 3 vertical books, wisdom books from Solomon, which are Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon, or Song of Songs. Okay, so we're going to get those books from them. So we're going to see how Solomon reigns as king, and we will see Israel in its glory, in its glory days. Still, maybe not set up the way that God intended back in Exodus when he was setting them up, when he took them out of Egypt. He was setting them up as a nation of priests. They were supposed to be ruled by God as a king, and the priests as kind of like the governors, and the king was supposed to be King Yahweh, who lived in heaven. Now we see kind of a different version of that, where they have an earthly king, but this kingdom here is going to be as good as it gets. The kingdom of Solomon is good as it gets for Israel. So get ready. This is the heyday of Israel coming up next week.